A day to remember. Francina Tutiliogi sat up in bed, holding on to dear life the photo of the man who melted her heart, Troy Edwards. It was the night before the big day, the biggest day in her life, where she was going to walk down that aisle and say, "I do," officially becoming Mrs. Troy Edwards. It was the moment her family had been awaiting, including all her cousins, distant and close, from all over the town. As she glanced at the photo of the striking young man, his golden hair that was slicked back, and ocean blue eyes that possessed serenity in them, with whom she'd spend the rest of her life, she sighed dreamily as she began to reminisce about the first time they laid eyes on each other. 1 year ago, during the summer, Troy was a student at the University of Cambridge studying English when he was offered a study abroad program that gave him the opportunity to travel to Italy. The summer program lasted for 7 weeks, and it was during one of those 7 weeks when he made a chance encounter with Francina. She was making her way back home from grocery shopping, and he was trying to find the best restaurant in town. She bumped into him, both hands carrying bags filled with vegetables and other ingredients for dinner, with a carrot falling to the ground. He picked it up for her, and when she looked up, she was enthralled by what she saw. With a sheepish grin, he spoke to her in flawless Italian, asking her for directions to the nearest restaurant for dinner. She laughed, replying to him in Italian that she could speak English as well, and she invited him to dine with her and her family so that he was not alone. Leave it to Francina to show generosity to a complete stranger, especially to an Englishman as good-looking as Troy was, with his sexy accent. She liked that he made an effort to communicate with her in Italian. Not many foreigners, yet alone Americans, would have gone out of their way to do that. Troy followed Francina to her home, where she introduced him to her family. He shook hands with Francina's father, Marco, and her mother, Martina. He also got to know her cousins, Elisa, Paolo, and Natalia, as well as her maternal grandparents, Rosa Maria and Giuseppe. Francina did not have any siblings, so her cousins were like the siblings she'd never had. Troy was an only child as well, so this was the first thing that bonded them as something they had in common. Despite Marco's protectiveness of his only daughter interacting with a man who was not Italian, he still got along with Troy, as did the rest of the family. Troy was a pleasant guest, and he was able to tell the family about who he was. They were impressed by his academic background and his flawless Italian, which eased the initial tensions between them when they encouraged him to speak English to them. Francina was impressed by Troy's ability to charm her family, and for the first time in her life, she fell in love without even realizing it. He charmed his way into her heart and she wanted to make sure he never forgot. So, when dinner was over and he was getting ready to leave, Francina walked Troy out and thanked him for his company. "I hope to see you again sometime soon," she said. "I'll see what I can do." He gave her that unforgettable smile before he left, and Francina sighed as she thought about the handsome man who came into her home that night and stole her heart away. As a 17-year-old girl, she'd never felt this way about anyone until she laid eyes on Troy. Now, it's been a whole year since that memorable night when she met him, and Francina was eager to marry Troy. She was 18, and he was 23, so she was not too young to get married. This was a time when it was the norm for women to wed at a young age, and Francina's family strongly believed that she was old enough to fall in love and marry. In their eyes, she was no longer a little girl. Marco realized this when Troy came over last week and asked for his permission to marry his beautiful, precious daughter. He trusted and loved Troy enough to consider him to be the son that he'd never had. And he eventually offered the young man his blessing to wed Francina. The next day, Martina and Rosa Maria accompanied Troy to the jewelry store to find the most beautiful ring for Francina, which took them an hour until he found the perfect one. When Troy realized how expensive it cost, he was unsure if it was worth it to spend abundant pocket money on a ring that Francina might not appreciate later in life. He was not employed at the moment, so this would pose a potential financial threat. Rosa Maria, giving him a sympathetic smile, suggested, "I suppose it would be better if you could just give her mine instead." She took off her ring and gave it to him. "Her grandfather gave this to me, which I also gave to her mother here. And now I'm giving it to you to give to her. This ring is a symbol of love in our family, and I have no doubt that you'll make her happy." Troy examined the ring before he could accept it. "Are you sure, Signora?" he asked. Rosa Maria nodded in response as a tear fell down her eye. Martina held her mother's hand. She could tell this was an emotional decision for her mother to make, for the sake of her lovely daughter. Martina said, "Real love does not cost anything. The gift you give must come straight from the heart. Francina shall treasure this all the days of her life. This we are certain of." Rosa Maria had brought her ring's jewelry box with her to secure the ring for the time being. The three of them thanked the store owner for her time before they departed, and Troy's decision was set. He was going to propose to Francina that evening during dinner. That evening, Francina was wearing a lovely aqua blue dress, looking as stunning as ever. She was elated to see Troy join her for dinner, for two at her house, and here he was, dressed in a suit and tie. She didn't know it, but he had the ring in his pocket for safekeeping. He would take it out during dessert time, but for now, it was time to enjoy the main course while a musician that her mother hired played gentle, romantic music on the piano. When it was time for dessert, the maid came to collect their dinner plates so that the cook could serve the tiramisu and panna cotta. Francina's favorite dessert since childhood was panna cotta, so it was a miracle that the cook could read her mind by providing her favorite dessert. The main course wasn't all that bad either, but the dessert was the best part. Troy held Francina's hand and gazed lovingly into her chocolate-brown eyes. "Have I ever told you how beautiful you looked tonight?" he asked in a smooth voice that caused her heart to beat. "You tell me that all the time," she replied with a giggle. "Well, that is the truth, and I'll never let you forget it. I love you, Francina. I can't explain it, but you mean the world to me. I've never met a woman as beautiful as you. I never felt this way about anyone else before, if you can believe it." Francina smiled. She believed it. He was her first and only. "I love you too, Troy. I love to spend time with you. And I love how happy you make my family. Their happiness is important to me, too. Thank you for opening my eyes and my heart to see what true love is. I do what I do best." He grinned as he made his bold move by getting down on one knee and taking out the ring. "And this is the best thing I'll ever do. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Francina. I know your family must think that you're much too young, but for me this feels right. I don't wish to wait a minute longer. Life is short and precious. Precious, just like you." A tear of joy ran down Francina's face. For a second, she thought she was dreaming, but she was not. This was reality. Troy Edwards was really proposing to her. "Troy," she began. "Shh, don't say anything yet. I love you with all my heart, Francina. Your family has been generous and kind to me, especially your father. He gave me his blessing to ask for your hand in marriage. He loves you and is rather protective of you, which is a great thing, because it means that you come from a loving family who want nothing but the best for you. They can agree that I'm the best for you, right? So, what do you say, Francina Tutiliogi? Will you make me the happiest man in the world and be my wife?" Another tear ran down Francina's face as she glanced down at the ring. She recognized it as her grandmother's ring, and it was a family treasure. Rosa Maria had handed it down to Martina, and Martina decided to give it to Troy to give to Francina. Touched by the beauty of the ring, Francina had no choice but to say yes to forever. "Yes, yes, 1,000,000 times yes," she squealed with joy as he put the ring on her finger. Troy announced. She said yes, everybody. Her family arrived in the kitchen to congratulate the young couple. They had organized this dinner so that Francina and Troy could share a private moment with each other as he proposed to her. She just made him the happiest man alive by saying yes. For the rest of the week, after that memorable evening, Francina and her family began preparing for the wedding. Troy's family and friends flew in from England so that they could be there for him. Now, the two families were eager to celebrate their children's eternal bliss. The night before the big day, Francina sat up in bed as she glanced at Troy's photo on her nightstand, reminiscing about the first time she met him, and her fears were eased. Everything was going to be perfect. She woke up in a blissful mood the next morning. A bright and beautiful Saturday. That morning, her family was cheerful as they worked with the photographers and makeup artists to capture as many photos of the bride-to-be as possible. Marco and Giuseppe decided to head to the church to inform the priest that they were getting Francina ready for the occasion. And they stayed in the church with the priest and incoming guests for the ceremony. The women remained in the house with Francina, along with her cousins, for moral support as she wore her elegant, long-sleeved, V-neck lace gown. It was an original, nothing like what her mother, grandmother, or aunts had worn before. Rosa Maria couldn't contain her emotions as she wept at the sight of her stunning granddaughter. She told Francina, "Sei una sposa bellissima. You make a beautiful bride." Francina, flattered by the compliment, gave her grandmother a hug. "Nonna, non piangere. Se piangi, mi farai piangere anche tu." Grandma, don't cry. If you cry, you'll make me cry too. Rosa Maria told Francina that she'd see her downstairs after her cousin, Elisa, helped her with her necklace. After Rosa Maria left, Elisa went to her room to find a more stylish necklace for Francina. In the moment that her cousin and grandmother left, and Francina was alone in her room, Francina went up to the window to open it so that she could get some fresh air in her room. It was supposed to be a very warm afternoon, but then she felt someone shove her in the back, causing her to stumble backward onto the window, shattering it. And she screamed as she fell many feet from the window to the ground. Elisa returned to her room, dumbstruck when she saw the shattered glass, and peered out at her injured cousin on the ground and cried out in terror. "Francina!" Rosa Maria and the others came running to the room. "Cosa è successo?" Rosa Maria asked Elisa, seeking to know what happened. Elisa replied, sobbing, "È Francina. È caduta dalla finestra." It's Francina. She fell out the window. Everyone gasped in shock and horror as they came up to the room, glanced at the remains of the broken glass window on the floor. Martina called 911 to report that her daughter had fallen out of the window. She offered to stay behind with Francina until help arrived, while Rosa Maria and the other women volunteered to go to the church to break the shocking news to Marco, Giuseppe, and even Troy. The wedding would have to be postponed for now. Everything happened within minutes. Paramedics came to transport Francina to the hospital, and the family was left reeling from the shocking news. Even Troy was devastated that such an unfortunate thing could happen to the woman that he loved, who he was supposed to share the rest of his life with. Now it wasn't to be. Instead, she was fighting for her life, not knowing whether she would make it or not. The doctors told the family that Francina had suffered significant head injuries and broken bones, so they were going to perform emergency surgery on her to save her life. In the meantime, investigators were around to examine the fall, to determine how she could have fallen out the window. A week later, Francina was in the process of recovering from the surgery, and her family became devoted to caring for her, including Troy. Although they did not get married as planned, he was still determined to take care of her, as if she was his wife. That's how much he loved her, and how much he was willing to stick by her, through the thick and thin, in sickness and in health, for better or worse. The vows he was following before he actually had a chance to say, "I do," to her. A week later, Francina was still in the process of recovery. That night, as she was about to wash her face in the bathroom before heading to bed, she couldn't help but overhear the conversation taking place downstairs in the living room. She heard Elisa sobbing uncontrollably, and the others comforting her. "Va bene, Elisa," Martina reassured her, telling her that everything was going to be okay. "No, non lo è," Elisa replied in between her sobs. "È tutta colpa mia. Ho spinto Francina apposta. Vedi, volevo ferirla, perché sono così gelosa di lei. Ottiene sempre tutto ciò che vuole. E ora sta per sposarsi con un uomo che ama. Non è giusto, perché che mi dici di me? Non posso farci niente se provo così tanto risentimento nei suoi confronti. Per l'amor del cielo, ha solo 18 anni. Elisa had just practically confessed to having pushed Francina out of the window deliberately while her cousin was alone in the room. She was supposed to help Francina put on her necklace, but instead, she ended up pushing her out the window instead. She wanted to hurt Francina, having always been jealous of her for whatever reason, believing that Francina always got everything she wanted, especially now that she was bound to marry the man that she loved, Troy Edwards. Elisa said she couldn't help the resentment that she'd apparently always felt toward Francina, and now she's trying to justify it by saying that Francina's the one getting married at only 18. Elisa was 23, the same age as Troy, and she herself was single and unattached. Men tended to gravitate more toward Francina than to her, or at least that's how she felt. That was a criminal confession in a nutshell. Francina wanted to go down and confront Elisa, but her weakened condition made her too tired to engage in any yelling. She'd yell at her tomorrow. Instead, she gave Troy a phone call to explain everything to him, and she asked him to report this to the authorities the next morning, which he agreed to do. This was her plan of revenge against Elisa, turning her in. When Francina woke up the next morning, Martina offered to help her downstairs to the kitchen for a nice breakfast. She asked her daughter, "Come ti senti stamattina?" wanting to know how Francina was feeling. "Sto bene, grazie, mamma," Francina replied, saying that she was feeling fine. Rosa Maria gave Francina her dish of eggs and toast, as well as a cup of orange juice, smiling adoringly at her brave granddaughter, who was handling all this with grace. "Grazie mille, nonna. Di niente, amor mio." Rosa Maria gave her a kiss on the forehead to say, "You're welcome, my love." At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and the officers called out for Elisa. Elisa introduced herself to them as they informed her that she was officially charged with assault toward Francina by shoving her out the window. Elisa sobbed, apologizing profusely to Francina and the others, although there was very little her apologies could do now. With delightful smiles, the whole family watched her being escorted by law enforcement. And for the first time in her life, Francina felt victorious toward her bitter, vengeful cousin, who was now going to face the consequences of her terrible actions. In the silence of ashes, Jacob's fingers trembled against the dented tin cup, water sloshing perilously close to the rim. The November air carved his lungs raw, bitter with smoke from chimneys that transformed flesh to ash. His worn shoes navigated the mud between barracks, sidestepping puddles that mirrored a colorless sky. At 13, Jacob had perfected invisibility. 3 years of silence, not by choice, but necessity after witnessing his father's execution, had rendered him a ghost among the living dead that shuffled through the camp. While other boys his age had been selected for immediate disposal, Jacob's muteness had ironically preserved him. The guards found utility in a servant who could never repeat their secrets, who existed in the peripheral shadows of their consciousness. The SS officers spoke freely in his presence. Plans whispered, transports scheduled, executions ordered, all captured in the flawless vault of Jacob's mind, where every detail existed in perfect recall, a gift that had once earned him praise from teachers in another lifetime, before yellow stars and cattle cars. Obersturmführer Kruger waited in his usual spot, a folding chair positioned in the sliver of shade beside Barracks 7. Jacob knew the man's habits with precision. The hat removal, 17 minutes into his shift. The triple tap of his boot before sitting. The heavy eyes, exactly 40 minutes after lunch. "Schneller, Junge!" Kruger barked, gesturing impatiently as Jacob approached. Jacob quickened his pace, keeping his eyes fixed on the shallow pool of water in the cup. One did not look directly at the gods of this underworld, the men who decided, with casual flicks of their fingers, who would breathe another day and who would feed the insatiable furnaces. Kruger snatched the cup, gulping noisily. Water escaped his lips, tracking through the dust on his chin. Jacob stood motionless, hands clasped before him, awaiting dismissal or further orders. The guard's eyes were bloodshot, the whites yellowed like old paper. Night duty in the processing center, Jacob surmised. New transports had arrived yesterday, which always meant sleepless shifts for the guards. "Wait," Kruger muttered, settling deeper into his chair. "I might want more." Jacob nodded once, the barest acknowledgement of the command. He knew stillness, as others knew prayer. A ritual of survival, practiced until it became reflex. The camp existed in constant motion, guards shouting, prisoners shuffling, machine guns occasionally stuttering their terrible poetry of death. To be still was to disappear. Minutes stretched. Kruger's head gradually lolled forward, his breathing deepening. The cup tilted dangerously in his loosening grip. Jacob watched through lowered lashes as the guard surrendered to sleep. The keys hanging from Kruger's belt caught the weak sunlight, transforming ordinary metal into something mythic. Freedom incarnate. Jacob's pulse accelerated, blood rushing in his ears like distant artillery. No guard ever slept on duty. The punishment was severe. Perhaps not death, but certainly disgrace. This aberration might never repeat itself. A singular crack in the impenetrable wall of captivity. Jacob's mind calculated with the precision of mathematics. 4 minutes until the patrol passed the northern fence. 7 minutes until roll call at the women's barracks would divert attention eastward. The electric generator hummed 60 meters to the west, powering the final barrier between imprisonment and possibility. His fingers, trained by years of obedience, trembled with rebellion as they reached toward the key ring. A lifetime compressed into a single breath as metal brushed against metal with the whisper of butterfly wings. The ring slid free. Jacob backed away silently, the keys clutched against his chest like a talisman. The dormant power they represented sent electric currents through his body, awakening nerves long numbed by survival. For the first time in 3 years, a ghost became solid. A shadow contemplated substance. A boy allowed himself to remember the concept of hope. The keys felt impossibly heavy in Jacob's pocket as he slipped between the skeletal shadows of barracks. His mind projected every detail of the camp upon the canvas of his consciousness. A perfect map etched by thousands of forced errands. There, the blind spot behind the infirmary where guards rarely patrolled. Here, the drainage ditch that ran beneath the eastern fence, partially obscured by withered weeds. Each movement demanded precision as afternoon shadows stretched across the packed earth. Jacob became one with them. Another darkness moving among darkness, his emaciated form barely disturbing the air. The camp's architecture revealed itself differently now. What had been a prison became a puzzle box, and Jacob held the solution in his trembling hand. 327 steps to the generator shed, a left turn at the kitchens, skirt the infirmary, avoid the dogs kenneled near the northern guard tower. Gunther, the shepherd with the white spot on his muzzle, raised his head as Jacob passed downwind. The animal's ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. Jacob froze, becoming stone. The dog's amber eyes held his for an eternal moment before dismissing him. Just another walking skeleton, carrying neither food nor threat. Jacob released the breath he'd been holding and continued his careful trajectory toward freedom. The world had shrunk to immediate sensations. Ribs against lungs, the metallic taste of fear, fabric against skin. Nothing existed beyond this moment of movement, this singular pursuit of escape. A sudden commotion erupted near the eastern fence. Jacob pressed himself against Barracks 12, becoming one with its weathered planks as two guards rushed past. Not for him, not yet. The keys remained undiscovered. As the guards disappeared, Jacob continued his journey through the camp's service areas, places where a silent child became as invisible as dust motes in sunlight. He reached the narrow passage between buildings where mud gave way to gravel, treacherous ground that might announce his presence. Jacob moved with the deliberate care of a tightrope walker. Testing each step, a soft sound stopped him. A whimper, barely audible, drifting from beneath the elevated supply depot. Jacob hesitated, freedom calling from just beyond. The sensible choice was clear. Continue, escape, survive. Yet he found himself crouching, peering into the darkness beneath the structure. 5 pairs of eyes reflected the meager light. Children, younger than himself, huddled together like rabbits in a warren. Their gaunt faces registered shock at his discovery. One boy raised a finger to cracked lips, pleading for silence that Jacob had mastered years ago. They had escaped a selection. That much was obvious. Children deemed too small for work were immediate candidates for the chambers. These 5 had somehow slipped away, hiding in this temporary sanctuary, while death searched elsewhere. Jacob knew their fate was sealed. The hiding place would be discovered within hours. The dogs would find them, or hunger would drive them into the open. Their brief rebellion against inevitability would end as all rebellions did in this place, with smoke rising from chimneys. His hand closed around the keys in his pocket. One boy, for certain, could navigate the camp's dangers. 5 children multiplied the risk exponentially. Mathematics again. Probability, chance, the cold equations of survival. The smallest child, a girl with eyes too large for her hollowed face, extended one skeletal hand toward him, not begging, not pleading, offering connection, humanity. Something the camp had systematically stripped away layer by layer until only animal survival remained. Jacob's memory flashed to his father's final words before the guards beat him silent. Remember who you are. He made his decision with quick, efficient gestures. Jacob motioned for them to follow. The children untangled themselves from their hiding place, emerging like shadows gaining substance. Their movements were clumsy with fear and weakness, but their eyes held absolute focus on Jacob, their unexpected savior, their silent Moses. The smallest girl slipped her hand into his. Her palm was fever hot against his cold fingers. The contact sent electricity through Jacob's arm, awakening something long dormant. Responsibility, connection, purpose beyond mere survival. Together, they became a small constellation of desperate stars, moving through the gathering twilight toward the generator shed and the possibility of freedom beyond. The generator shed vibrated at the camp's edge. Its drone masked 6 pairs of feet, navigating between the fences as Jacob led with a cartographer's confidence. Evening patrol would begin in 17 minutes. Searchlights would sweep the eastern perimeter in 12. The rhythm of the camp's security beat within Jacob's consciousness, like a second heartbeat. The smallest girl, her name yet unspoken between them, clung to his hand with surprising strength. Behind them, the other children followed in a chain of desperate hope, each grasping the clothing of the one ahead. Their collective breath formed ghostly plumes in the November air, spectral evidence of lives not yet extinguished. Jacob reached the generator shed's rusted door. 3 keys tried, 3 keys rejected, before the 4th slid home. The lock surrendered with a reluctant click that seemed thunderous in his heightened awareness. He ushered the children inside, pulling the door closed behind them. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the red glow of indicator lights. The smell of oil and metal replaced the camp's perpetual stench of suffering. The generator's pulse vibrated through the concrete floor into their bones. Jacob's memory reconstructed the shed's interior with perfect clarity. He had been brought here once to clean grease spills, one of countless menial tasks assigned to the camp's silent shadow. His fingers traced metal casings and wire housing until he found what he sought, the main control panel. Behind him, the children huddled together for warmth and courage. The oldest boy, perhaps 10, whispered something in Polish that Jacob couldn't understand. The words dissolved into the mechanical growl surrounding them. Language had become irrelevant. Only action mattered now. Through the shed's single grimy window, Jacob watched lights flicker on across the camp as day surrendered to evening. Searchlights awakened, their harsh beams cutting white arcs through gathering darkness. Guards emerged from barracks, rifles slung across shoulders. Somewhere, Obersturmführer Kruger would be awakening to the realization of his catastrophic error. Jacob's hands hovered over the generator's controls. His perfect memory recalled every wire, every connection observed during his brief exposure to the machine's inner workings. Disabling it would plunge the camp into darkness and deactivate the electrified fence. But the backup systems would engage within minutes. Their window for escape would be measured in heartbeats. A distant alarm shattered the twilight. A shrill mechanical scream that announced discovery. Whether Kruger's missing keys or the children's absence had triggered it remained unknown. The distinction was academic. The hunt had begun. The smallest girl pressed herself against Jacob's side, her body trembling like a captured bird. He placed a reassuring hand on her head, then turned his attention back to the generator. Its massive form contained both their imprisonment and their salvation. Jacob seized a wrench from a nearby workbench and wedged it between critical gears. With calculated force, he twisted until metal screamed against metal. Sparks erupted in blue-white constellations, reflected in the wide eyes of the watching children. The generator's rhythm faltered, coughed, then disintegrated into mechanical death throes. Lights across the camp flickered, dimmed, and died. Darkness descended like a blessing, punctuated only by the crimson pulse of emergency lights and the distant, frantic beams of guards' flashlights. Jacob yanked the shed door open. Freedom waited in the gathering night, separated from them by a single fence now rendered harmless. He gestured urgently to the children, pointing toward the eastern boundary, where forest began 200 meters beyond the perimeter. Dogs barked in the distance, savage, hungry sounds that accelerated their terror into action. The children poured from the shed like water finding its level, Jacob bringing up the rear. The smallest girl's hand remained locked in his as they navigated by instinct and starlight toward the fence. With his free hand, Jacob tested the metal mesh. No electricity hummed beneath his fingertips. The backup generators had not yet engaged. He boosted the smallest children over first, their bird-like bodies barely disturbing the wire. The older ones climbed with desperate strength, tumbling to freedom on the other side. As searchlights swept closer and dogs barking intensified, Jacob hoisted himself upward, muscles straining against the weight of exhaustion and malnutrition. Barbed wire tore through his threadbare clothing, carving shallow furrows into his flesh. Pain registered as distant information, irrelevant to the imperative of movement. He dropped to the ground beyond the fence, landing beside the waiting children. The absent hum of electricity had been replaced by shouts and whistles, the camp awakening to their rebellion. Jacob pointed toward the dark line of trees in the distance. "Run," he mouthed silently, the word forming on lips that had forgotten speech. Together, they fled across open ground, 6 shadows merging with the greater darkness. Behind them, flashlight beams swept the area around the disabled generator. Ahead, the forest promised concealment, if not safety. The space between represented the most dangerous passage of their lives, exposed, vulnerable, illuminated by nothing but faith and starlight. The forest swallowed them whole. Pine needles cushioned their footfalls as the scent of resin replaced the camp's miasma with air that tasted of possibility. Jacob led them deeper into the wilderness, away from searchlights that strafed the forest edge like mechanical predators. Behind them, the camp's alarms continued their frantic cry, a sound that diminished with each step, but remained embedded in their consciousness like a splinter beneath skin. The smallest girl stumbled, her strength finally failing. Jacob caught her before she fell, lifting her slight weight into his arms. She weighed no more than autumn leaves, her bones fragile as a bird's, beneath his hands. Her head came to rest against his shoulder, absolute trust in the gesture. They continued for what might have been hours or minutes. Time had dissolved into meaningless abstraction. Distance alone mattered now. Every meter gained was a victory against death. The other children followed Jacob without question, their faith in his silent guidance absolute. A stream appeared, silver in the moonlight. Jacob gestured for them to drink. The water tasted of stone and stars, reviving something beyond their physical bodies. Perhaps hope, perhaps humanity. The oldest boy spoke, his voice a rusty hinge breaking the forest's solemn quiet. Müssen wir weitergehen? Must we go further? Jacob nodded, pointing deeper into the forest. The danger had not passed. Dogs could track them for kilometers. Morning would bring planes, searchers, consequences. The Reich did not surrender its prisoners easily, especially those who carried knowledge of what transpired behind electrified fences. The smallest girl stirred in his arms, her eyes reflecting fragments of moonlight. Her lips moved, forming words that emerged as a whisper. Jak się nazywasz? What is your name? The question penetrated layers of silence, built over years of survival. Jacob hadn't heard his own name spoken aloud since his father's death. It existed only in memory, a secret thing preserved from contamination by the camp's horrors. His throat constricted around unspoken syllables. Speech had become foreign territory, a country from which he had been exiled. Yet something stirred within the wasteland of his voice, a seed breaking through frozen ground after endless winter. "Jacob," he whispered, the sound strange and wonderful in the forest's embrace. His voice emerged broken, raw with disuse, but undeniably his own. "Jestem, Jacob. I am Jacob." The girl's smile transformed her hollow face, revealing the ghost of beauty that starvation had nearly erased. "Estera," she replied, offering her name as a gift in exchange for his. The other children murmured their own names: Tomasz, Lilka, Beniek, David. Each syllable a reclamation of identity. The camp had attempted to replace with numbers. They stood in a tight circle beneath the ancient pines, no longer prisoners, not yet survivors, suspended in the fragile space between captivity and freedom. A distant howl shattered their momentary peace, the unmistakable voice of a tracking dog catching their scent. The hunt continued. Jacob set Estera gently on her feet and pointed westward, where the forest grew denser, offering deeper concealment. "Musimy biec," Estera said with quiet resolve. "We must run." Jacob nodded, taking her hand once more. Together, they plunged deeper into the wilderness. 6 children against an empire, armed with nothing but the desperate courage of those with nothing left to lose. The forest embraced them, branches parting to accept their flight, roots steadying their uncertain steps. Dawn found them huddled beneath a rocky overhang beside a wider stream. Exhaustion had claimed the younger children, while Jacob remained awake, listening to the forest's morning chorus, replacing the mechanized rhythms of captivity. Estera sat beside him, her slight shoulder pressed against his arm. "Dokąd idziemy?" "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the stream's gentle murmur. Jacob's mind, so accustomed to precision and calculation, could offer no certain answer. The geography of freedom remained unmapped territory. He had memorized every centimeter of captivity, but possessed no chart for liberation. The words came slowly. "Na południe, du partyzantów." South, to the partisans. Rumors had circulated through the camp. Resistance fighters in the southern forests, Jews and Poles who had escaped, fighting with salvaged weapons and desperate courage. Perhaps only legend, perhaps salvation. Estera's small hand found his, fingers intertwining. "Będziemy wolni." We will be free. Jacob looked at the sleeping children, at the forest stretching around them, at morning light filtering between trees. Freedom remained a distant shore, separated by hunger, winter, pursuit, and war. Yet for the first time in 3 years, possibility existed. He squeezed Estera's hand gently and discovered within himself the capacity for speech once more. Words emerged like water from stone, each one a small miracle of reclamation. Już jesteśmy. We already are. The forest absorbed his words, carrying them toward the lightening sky. Behind them, the camp continued its grim business. Ahead, war raged. But here, 6 children had rewritten the equations of their existence beyond barbed wire and numbered tattoos. Jacob tilted his face toward the breaking day, feeling warmth touch his skin. His voice, newly rediscovered, held steady as he spoke again. Not to Estera, not to the sleeping children, but to the memory of his father that he carried within. I remember who I am, the mannequin in the lake. Johnny and Sally didn't believe me when I told them the mannequin in the water had saved me from drowning. Well, something had pulled me down, and I suspected it had been her, but I didn't mention that part to my friends. Instead, I pointed to the exact spot where I believed she'd pulled me up from the rough Lake Michigan water. They laughed out loud. It's true. Her arms swayed forward and back. I swear. I motioned with my arms the same way the mannequin had done so. The marshmallow that was supposed to be for my s'more slipped out of my fingers. Sand covered my piece. For God's sake, I'd been looking forward to making them with my buddy and his girl. Sally guffawed. You're so stupid, you know that? Plus, if you would have gotten more practice in class, you wouldn't have almost drowned. Maybe I shouldn't be here with your stupid asses, I said, glowering at Johnny, who'd had the bright idea of skipping school. Just because he'd said, but I knew why. Because of her. Johnny had skipped school so many times that the teachers probably didn't even care to find out where he was. Me, though, this was only my second time. The first time was just a few days ago, the day the mannequin had saved me. I hurled the marshmallow into the water and watched as it floated away. But when the tip of a mannequin's fingers sprang out of the water and took my piece in, a shiver ran down from the top of my head to the end of my toes. Did you guys see that? Bro! Here. Johnny split his s'more in half. The gooey center stretching like fresh, out of the deep fryer mozzarella sticks. My buddy Johnny and I had been friends for 4 years now. Since first grade, my only friend. All the other kids sided with him always, but when I tried talking to them, they'd ignore me. Yes, I longed for more friends, and yes, I felt a little jealous of Johnny's charisma, but I knew I was lucky to have Johnny in my life. My only friend. I helped him with his schoolwork, and he got me out of trouble. Always took the blame, no matter what shenanigans we got into. And this time was no exception. He had a fake doctor's note ready for us, and if the teachers and parents found out it was fake, he'd say he'd planned it all. Sally, though, we'd just met her this year in 5th grade. The moment I laid eyes on her, my heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. Little hearts formed around her head, just like in the cartoons. But just as quick as I'd fallen for her, she took a liking to Johnny, and they hit it off. And she often rolled her eyes at me. At the end of the pier that was yards and yards away, water splashed. I squinted to get a good look, figured something had been thrown into the water and washed ashore, for it was usually like that. Guests came to the lake, swam, held parties. Music blasted at full volume, and instead of taking care of the lake that provided them with the best Saturday and Sunday parties and cookouts, they littered the water and the sand. Even the junkies left their pills, and needles scattered their poison, which became a scavenger hunt for the other junkies and beach cleanup crew. I took a few steps away from Johnny and Sally, then turned to tell them I'd be back, that I wanted to see what was at the pier. But Johnny and Sally began to make out. They kissed, as fake as the telenovela actors my mother watched every evening from 6 to 9. And she ignored me those 3 hours. In fact, I was on my own most of the time, whether she was home or not. She either worked, watched TV, or locked herself in her bedroom. When I arrived at the pier, I made my way under the boardwalk. The clouds that had gathered darkened the underpier, but I could still make out the figures that stood still. It was like they'd met for a secret meeting, and I'd just discovered them. "Hi," my voice said, struggling to get that one word out. Not one of them minded me, but I could hear their whispers. I inched closer. Their whispers stopped. At the end of the underpier, where the water and sand met, there she was, my mannequin, my savior. I went to her, avoiding the still figures. But as I neared them, a harsh gust of wind pushed me down to the sand, close to them. "Push," I heard them whisper. "Water," they continued. My breathing increased at the thought of these lifeless models somehow communicating. I looked up at them. The figures had their heads turned to me. How? I had no clue. They had no eyes, no mouths. In fact, there was nothing on them but the head, arms, legs, and torso that made them up. Naked, motionless. And though they weren't looking at me directly, their gaze was fixed on me. I pushed myself up and walked backward, away from them, away to the light past the underpier. But before my body touched the light, one of them blocked me. It was her. I knew it. There was a connection between us. I turned to her. The arm that had stopped me remained up in the air. "Bring," they said. And I turned to them. No realizing when, she pushed me, and again, I was down. Sand kicked in my face. No idea which of them had done it, because when I looked up, they remained still. Now, they were closer. How many were they? 9, perhaps. 10, if you counted her behind me. Where was Johnny? Sally? Still making out? Friend? Forever. Us? Never leave. They had a cultish demeanor about them. When they spoke, it was chant-like, but like they were speaking to me. "Water?" she said behind me. "Lake." "What? You want me to go into the water?" "Us. Forever." Friend. Were they recruiting me? "I can't," I cried. The sand that covered my hand scratched my eyes. "My mom, she'll get worried. My friends, they'll come looking for me soon. She hate," one of them whispered. "Who? My mom? Sally?" "He lost," another one said. "Johnny." Had I lost my friend to her? We friends. The one behind me tugged at my shirt, her hand already pointed at the water. I turned to my friends. For a moment, it looked like Johnny had noticed me and locked eyes with me. Then, Sally turned his face away to hers. Whether she hated me or disliked me, what was true was that she didn't consider me her friend. She was all about Johnny. I turned to the mannequins under the pier. There were 8 now, plus she, who had saved me, still behind me. The one missing was now in the lake, its torso above the water, its arms extended, ready to receive me. "Friends forever," I whispered. "I've said too much." I noticed him the first time at the coffee shop on 3rd Street. He sat 2 tables over, stirring a cup of tea he never drank. He wasn't looking at me, not directly, but there was something in the way his head tilted, the way his eyes flickered over the rim of his cup, that made me feel observed. Every so often, he would blow on his mug, and eventually, this act became unsettling, as I knew the tea must have grown cold in the hour he sat unmoving. This man was dressed neatly, a stark contrast to myself, in a worn sweatshirt and messy bun that couldn't contain my red hair. He wore an ironed shirt, pressed pants, and his copper hair was immaculately combed and styled. He was remarkable because he simply did not belong. A bustling place with people moving in and out as he sat stoically with his tea. The second time was at the bookstore downtown. I was running my fingers along the shelves, searching for something to pull me in. Recently, I've been drawn to the paranormal and had moved into horror. It was terrifying, yet intriguing, as I began to imagine all there is out there that is unknown. As I perused the back of the latest Awad novel, I saw him standing in the philosophy aisle to my right. He wasn't reading, just tracing the spine of a book with one long finger. When I walked past, he looked up. "Not your usual genre," he said, nodding toward the horror novel in my hands. I frowned. "Excuse me?" He tilted his head. "You usually read literary fiction. Something with layered metaphors, quiet heartbreak." A shiver danced down my spine. "How would you know that?" He didn't answer. Instead, he closed the book he had been holding and walked away, disappearing behind the towering shelves before I could press further. As I followed him, his pace quickened. Dressed in seemingly the exact same clothes as days before, with a steady, strong step, I could not place him, though it felt like I knew him from somewhere. In my haste, without noticing, I had run into a display. As the books scattered to the floor, I muttered apologies to the staff member who ran over. I quickly looked up, and he was gone. By the third time, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I was at the park, spring in the air, though Lake Michigan was still hedged in ice dunes, which rose and fell in the evening light. My breath curling in front of me in soft clouds. He was sitting on a bench, his posture relaxed, hands resting in his lap. Unlike before, he didn't pretend not to notice me. I noticed he wore a scarf. A scarf, I swear, was my own. I had lost it many years ago, in grade school, and was scolded for my carelessness. It couldn't be, I thought, as I approached closer. His gaze lifted as I approached, as if he had been waiting. "You always take this route home." I stopped in my tracks. "What?" He smiled, but it wasn't a casual, friendly expression. It was something else, something knowing. "The same path, every evening. You like the way the light hits the water at this hour." My pulse quickened. "Are you following me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured to the lake. There's something peaceful about watching things move where they aren't meant to be. The way ripples distort reflections. Everything familiar becomes something else. I crossed my arms. "That doesn't answer my question." He exhaled, running a hand through his auburn hair. "No, I suppose it doesn't." My skin prickled. "Who are you?" For a moment, I thought he might tell me. He parted his lips, as if considering it. His gaze locked onto mine with an intensity that sent a strange, twisting sensation through my stomach. But then, just as quickly, something shifted. His face, his expression. It was like watching a shadow pass over the sun. "I've said too much," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He stood, brushing invisible dust from his coat. "Forget this conversation." My heart pounded. "Forget it?" He nodded, his voice quiet. "It's better that way." And then he turned, walking away with an unsettling hum. I wanted to call out, to demand answers, but my throat tightened. I could only watch as he disappeared into the trees on the shoreline, his silhouette dissolving in the twilight. It wasn't until I turned back toward the path, heart hammering, that I realized something strange. There were no footprints where he had been standing, and the air where he had spoken still carried the scent of something I couldn't quite name. Something like old paper, burnt cedar, and a storm about to break. I don't remember deciding to come here. One moment, I was standing in the park. The next, the ice stretched before me, endless and waiting. I had begun to question whether I was losing my grip on reality. The strange man's cryptic words, the shifting moments in time, and the absence of solid ground beneath my feet had all led me to this moment, standing on the frozen shore of Lake Michigan. The ice cracked beneath my boots, protesting against the weight of yet another cold season. The lake stretched out before me, an endless horizon of white and blue that should have felt serene, but instead left me with an unsettling feeling, like something was wrong, something lurking just out of sight. I walked carefully, mindful of the shifting terrain beneath me. The lake was beautiful, but treacherous. Mounds of frozen sand rose in strange, wind-carved shapes, dusted with snow. The ice here was patchy, some parts solid, some beginning to crack and leak dark pools of water beneath. There was something about this place that made my stomach turn, something about the way the lake seemed to pulse under my feet. It felt alive, watching me, waiting. The icy wind bit at my skin, and my breath curled in the air in front of me in wisps of smoke. I knelt by a pool of dark water that had opened beneath the ice, watching as minnows darted below, their silver bodies flashing like tiny ghosts in the clear, cold depths. The clarity of the water made my pulse quicken. Too easy to see the darkness below, too easy to imagine the lake's cold hunger. Then, something caught my eye, a darker patch of ice than the others, an odd shape trapped beneath the surface. I moved closer, my boots skidding slightly on the slick ground. The ice here was different, smoother, clearer, almost like glass. And underneath it, something unnatural. A smear of color, a reddish-orange streak that seemed impossibly bright against the deep blue-black of the water. My heart lurched. I knelt down, tapping gently at the ice with the toe of my boot, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The shape underneath wavered, but it didn't move. I pressed harder, cracking the ice, and then, as though the surface were giving up its secret, the water pooled, revealing what had been hidden beneath. Hair, long and dark, flowing like seaweed with the current. A face, pale and lifeless, staring upward, eyes wide and empty. My breath caught. A sharp, cold terror raced through my veins. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest, but I couldn't look away. The wind howled, and the ice beneath me groaned, shifting uneasily, and then realization struck like a physical blow. The woman under the ice, frozen, lifeless, was me. A strangled sound left my throat. My mind recoiled, trying to reject what I was seeing, but there was no denying it. It was my own face staring back at me, my own vacant, sightless eyes, trapped beneath the ice. A whisper cut through the howling wind. "Do you understand now?" I turned sharply. The man was there, standing just a few feet behind me, as if he had always been. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes, an ancient sorrow, a knowing, made my stomach churn. "You weren't meant to find this," he said quietly, his gaze flickering to the ice, to the frozen image of me. I shook my head, my pulse pounding in my ears. "What is this? Why is she? Why am I?" "You've been lost," he said softly. "Lost in time, lost in memory. The past and future bleed together. You are the woman under the ice, and yet you're still here, trying to find your way." A deep, pulsing ache settled in my chest. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. I wanted to reject his words, to turn and run, but something about them rang true in a way I couldn't explain. I opened my mouth to speak, but something flickered in my peripheral vision. Movement in the ice. I turned sharply, expecting to see the body beneath me shift. But what I saw instead made my blood run cold. Reflections. Not just one, but many, scattered across the ice in broken, distorted fragments. My face, but not as it was now. Older, younger, crying, laughing, standing somewhere else entirely, flickering like a glitch in time. 100 versions of me trapped beneath the surface, shifting and blending like ripples in the water. One version of me didn't flicker and vanish like the others. She was staring back, her mouth moving soundlessly, like she was trying to warn me. My hands trembled. "This isn't real," the man sighed, as if he had been expecting this reaction. "What is real?" he murmured. "Is time so linear, Alex? Can you really be sure you're still the same person you think you are? Or have you already crossed over?" My pulse slammed against my ribs. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong. But something inside me knew he wasn't. The lake groaned beneath me, the ice fracturing in slow, creeping lines. The world tilted, unsteady, and for a moment, I felt as though I was slipping between the cracks, the space between past and future collapsing around me. I turned back to the man, searching his face for some kind of anchor, some kind of answer. "What do I do?" I whispered. His eyes were solemn, unwavering. You come with me. There's only one way to move forward. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. I hesitated, my gaze flickering once more to the frozen version of myself beneath the ice. A life lost, a path already taken. But if I stepped away, if I turned back now, would I ever get another chance to change it? I swallowed hard. My fingers curled into fists at my sides. And then I nodded. The man held out his hand, and I took it.